and welcome to this week's episode of Come to Find Out. This week we are trying to help people avoid foreclosure. So I'm joined with Steve Greaves with Tithe and Chris Dreger with Search to Close. Did I say it right?
You did.
Yes. All right. I was practicing off camera to say it correctly. But anyway, so the three of us have been working together on a deal that is a short sale, and we got to talking about how we could easily help people avoid this situation, or at least help navigate if you did get into that situation. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you start, Steve, and let us know kind of, what do you think, when people get to that situation, like what is a way that someone could avoid going into that foreclosure? Like how many payments can you miss before you as a lender would trigger oh, we're starting the foreclosure process?
Yeah, good question. So the biggest thing with foreclosure and missing mortgage payments is, I always advise everyone be proactive, because the hard part is once you miss a payment, a normal refi is kind of out of the question, because you have to have a history of making your payments on time. So the biggest thing I tell people is if you're gonna miss something, miss a different payment. Don't miss the mortgage payment. So we've seen times where mortgage payments missed, but they've made all their car payments, their credit cards. Like, okay, well, you should prioritize the mortgage payment because that's the biggest thing in getting a refi done. Once you start missing payments though, it could be 3 payments, it could be 6 payments before they start a foreclosure process. Once that process has started, you can't get out of it. So you have to avoid it, start early, be proactive. So I can come from a background where I did, hundreds of refis for people who were in the situation where they were proactive. They came to us and said hey, we need to figure something out. My wife lost her job, we can't afford the bills, and then we find a refi option or maybe a home equity line option that can pay off some other debt, get them back in a situation where they can afford their payments again. So that's the biggest thing, just be proactive. When you start to see our bank account's running dry, we're not gonna be able to make payments, prioritize that mortgage payment, but then also get in touch with a mortgage company. Now, if you get to the point where you are already missing payments, but you don't want to go into foreclosure, you need to talk to your servicer, because then we talked about this earlier, they can do what's called a modification of your mortgage to avoid foreclosure. So pretty much servicers don't want you to foreclose.
Right.
They don't want to do that. So they'll work with you, they'll find something that will work.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is if you find yourself in a situation where you're gonna miss a payment, go ahead and contact your lender right away to ask them about a modification or some sort of refinancing.
Correct. Yeah. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll do a modification where they'll just push your term out. It's not fun to go to a 40-year term, but it's better than foreclosing, right? Mm-hmm. So they'll do something like that. But before you get to that point, if you're noticing that it's hard to pay the bills because you have a lot of credit card debt, or you can't afford your car loans that you took out that are too big. Me as the lender, if you haven't missed a mortgage payment yet, I can usually find a way to make something work to get you back to a point where you can start saving and get ahead. And when you refi, we can set it up that you skip 2 months of payments in the process, really. So if we're gonna close your loan in June, let's say, because we're paying off your lender in June, you don't have a payment that month. The following month, July, you don't have your first mortgage payment yet, so your first payment would be August. So sometimes that helps people just catch back up, along with maybe accessing some equity out to pay off debt. So that's the biggest thing I think is going on right now, especially in our local Columbus market. Mm-hmm. People who have been in their house for at least a year or two, they've made tons of money off the appreciation of the market, and they can tap into that to better their financial situation, and they might not realize it. So that's really the education I would give is let's see how much equity you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I know from a title standpoint, Chris, you've kind of shared some stories of people, that you've helped in this process. Now, if someone did a modification and then went to sell, I know you had mentioned that sometimes people don't understand what that means. I'm sure their lender explained it. I'm not saying they didn't, but sometimes we hear only what we want to hear. So from a title perspective, can you kind of share what that would look like whenever they do go to sell if they've done a modification?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest things that we see is when you refinance or modify a government loan, so your FHA, your VA, or USDAs, when you do that modification, that balance just doesn't go away. So although your mortgage statement might say that, they deferred $30,000, $40,000, that then is put into a second lien on your property. So it's going to sit right behind your first mortgage. You think you're getting ahead, you forget about that second mortgage balance because you're not making any payments on it. But then when you go to sell or even refinance, that lien comes back up, and it's not something that you can just easily subordinate. You have to pay it off. So one of the cases that we just had was, it was roughly a $300,000 purchase price. The client thought they only owed about $120,000, but they had a $50,000 lien sitting behind it, which significantly cut into the cash that they were going to receive. And obviously they were very frustrated by this. They were pretty distraught. So just making sure that when you're doing that modification, you're reading your documentation, you're not just signing it, and you understand what you're truly getting into. But on the contrary to that, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, your conventional loans, sometimes they don't do that, and that balance truly does get, deferred. So it's just really understanding your documentation, to kind of piggyback off Steve, it's being proactive. It's stepping in front of it. There's no reason to be, discouraged or, like it's a bad thing. It's getting in front of it, realizing what the next 30 days is going to look like, rather than, falling behind, because then you're no longer in control.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's such a great point, because I think unfortunately there's so many of us that we're just too proud and we're embarrassed that we got ourselves into that situation, whether that be that you just racked up too much credit card debt, or you lost your job, or you're going through a divorce, or you sadly lost a spouse. There are lots of things that can start this process, but I think one of the things that the three of us all agree on is let's normalize this, that it's not an embarrassing thing. It happens to everyone, what do they say? Most people are just one paycheck away from being homeless.
Yeah.
So, if you keep that in mind, no one's going to judge you. The three of us are not going to judge you if you come to us. And I know we're all servant leaders and want to just do the best that we can for people. And if that means, if someone comes to me and it doesn't make sense for them to sell and it makes sense for you to refi, I would much rather them do that and stay in their house and have a roof over their head than me to talk them into doing something that isn't in their best interest.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and to that point though, sometimes, I've been able to do refis for people I mentioned to you before, where sometimes we save people $1,500, $2,000 a month on their bills just by restructuring it, using the equity in their home. But other times, you look at it, it's like, hey, there's not a whole lot we can do to make this better. You really probably do need to look at, should I list my house? How much can I get? You can help them know exactly how much they would get from the proceeds of that sale. And maybe they can't buy a new house right away. Maybe they rent for a little bit and save up and get themselves in the right spot. I think listing sometimes would also make sense, especially if you lose an income, or your spouse, you lose your spouse who was a big part of your income, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the big thing, is just staying in control. The
Yeah.
moment you start falling behind, you give the bank the control. And if you go towards a foreclosure situation, like Steve said, you don't have any say. If you list, when you start realizing that you can no longer afford or there's no other options, you can still make money, and you can work on going and finding a new place to live or buying a new house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. And then, on the flip side, if someone, maybe started down this path and thought, oh, next month I'm gonna be able to make it up, and then something else happens, and it just becomes a snowball effect, because I think a lot of people have been in that situation. I know I personally have been like, oh yeah, I'm gonna totally catch up on paying this stuff off, and then something else comes up, or a kid needs something, or a car breaks down or whatever. So, as you go down this path, if you haven't been proactive and you've started to lose control, I'd love for us to kind of talk about how to navigate, what is the next steps to avoid foreclosure, because I'm sure foreclosure, just like a bankruptcy, affects your credit. How long does a foreclosure stay on your
Well, so
record?
yeah, good question. So if you're trying to buy a new house, the conventional guidelines, you have to wait 7 years after foreclosure.
Wow.
So it's a big thing. So in the case that we're working on together,
Yeah.
someone who is about to go into foreclosure, they actually flipped it to a short sale, which is a little less extreme, and those are usually 4 years. In some cases, you can get it down to 2 years that you have to wait. So it's a little bit less extreme, but really, it takes a while for that to recover. So like we said, being proactive, there's usually a better option than foreclosure if you just are proactive with it and talk to the experts who can help you.
Well, and what I learned, through going through this process, because this was my first short sale, my first time, because obviously over the last few years we haven't been seeing, foreclosures and short sales and all of that stuff because people were able to, get their mortgage forgiven or in forbearance or whatever, which in a minute I'd love for you to touch on how that can come back to bite you if you didn't read the fine print. But for this situation, obviously we're not going to mention names or places or anything like that, but long story short, had a buyer come to me, wanted to purchase a home that they knew the person was not able to stay in financially, and that it was going to go to an auction. It was going to go to sheriff's auction, which means it's in the foreclosure process. And so by the time I got involved, and then got you both involved in it, it had kind of reached a point that we couldn't do anything else. I know we all asked, the lender, I personally asked the lender, like, is there something else we can do to help these people? And they were like, no. So unfortunately, when you get to that situation, what we were able to do is a short sale, because to your point, it's less dent on your credit versus going through foreclosure.
Right.
But what I also learned through this process, thanks to Chris telling me that because I was feeling bad that this gentleman was going to lose a house that and make no money on, even though it got him out of it, he can't make any money on it. And so after talking with Chris, and it was explained to me, you actually cannot make money as the seller. So if you get to the point that you're doing a short sale, you cannot make any money on it. So again, that's why you want to be proactive. And if you've already missed 1 or 2 payments, and that there's no end in sight to that, go ahead and get a realtor involved to assess your property to figure out, because if we get it on the market before all of this happens, then you can make money off of it. But if it goes into the foreclosure process and we're talking about a short sale, you can make nothing. So you get to walk away from it, cool, but you're not making any of that equity that you likely had in the house. So, I don't know if there's anything else you guys want to add to that, but I just wanted to share that example so that if someone gets into that situation and they're thinking about it, they can make that decision like, hey, let's go ahead and sell this so we can make some money and start over and not have anything hit our record. Maybe there was like a couple of dings for missed payments, but that's way less than, short sale or foreclosure.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that, the bank is going to be charging legal fees, court costs, they're going to be racking up their own bill as you're going through it. And again, it goes back to the staying in control. At that point, you guys have money left in your equity from that house, and he can't tap into it at all. So not only has he lost his house, but now he has nothing to fall back on from all the payments that he did make and all the equity that he built.
Yeah.
So it's a complete wash.
Yeah. I know, which is tough, and I know it's been, tough. I know you and I have talked about that, Steve, where we're like, we feel bad, because we're like, we want. I know you're just like me. We want win-win situations where everyone kind of, wins. But unfortunately, this is the only way. The buyer's getting an amazing deal, and the seller is getting out from it. So essentially, it's a win-win.
It's working out,
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing that he might not have known is how much equity he had to list it, before all this happened 6 months ago, or how long he's been struggling with his payments. So that's what we want everyone to know is like, get us involved. Let's see how much equity you actually have.
Yeah.
There might be a way better option than just slowly going into foreclosure, which you can't do anything about. But to your point, most people, if you look at the statistics, it's like 76% or something of households have 1 month of emergency fund. That's it.
Yeah.
like 1 month of bills. So you got, yeah, like you said, a couple dominoes fall the wrong way. Now you're behind.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but yeah, prioritizing, finding a way to make that mortgage payment. If you miss other stuff, you know, put that on the back burner, make the mortgage payment, because that's way more options and you're in control, like Chris has been saying.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then I know when we were talking about this, because we are working on, some documents to try and help people, and, we're going to do a class to, try and help people also to understand whenever they're in this situation. And I know you had mentioned something about, if they can't refi, they could potentially do like a bridge loan or something like that. Can you give kind of a high level overview of what that would kind of look like and how that would help someone?
Yeah, for sure. So there's some really cool programs out right now that if you have equity and you're looking to get out of the house you're in because maybe it's too much and you're trying to downsize, you can do what's called a bridge loan, where you can tap into that equity, use that on your next purchase, and while you're waiting for your house to sell, that current house payment is not your responsibility at the moment, because they basically give you 90 days where you don't have to make mortgage payments on the current house. You get to tap into that equity and then you're selling it. So a lot of times what people say is like, oh, I can't qualify for a new house and this one, I have to sell this one first. And then it's really just tricky to line all that up. This gives you the ability to have some flexibility there, where you have that 90-day grace period to buy that next house using your current equity.
Yeah. Well, and I think we also had talked about this, as we were kind of going through like tips and tricks for people, how to avoid foreclosure and then how to navigate if you've started down that path, and we talked about how, with all of the inflation and, with all the tax bills coming, there are going to be a lot of people out there, like, so it's not even something that you necessarily had control over. It can be an outside thing that could make it to where, you could afford your house. Now your taxes, have gone up exponentially, and now you have to pay an additional $500 a month. That may push people over the edge. So again, that would be a time when you would want to start talking with your lender to see about a modification, or, talking with your realtor to find out, does it make more sense for us just to sell this and get into something new? Or, like, do we just take out a loan? Can we tap into our equity? What can we do to, take care of this? So.
Yeah, and I think it would work really well for the person who lived in an area with higher taxes, maybe for the schools. Now their kids are grown, maybe their income's coming down because they're just retiring, they're not making as much, but now that tax bill is a burden. Find them a house in an area with lower taxes, where they can still live comfortably, but then that bridge loan program would help them do that. I think that would be perfect.
Yeah.
And there's probably a lot of people in that boat right now.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I know, Chris, you had mentioned that you had a situation not too long ago, and it was a divorced couple. Do you want to kind of touch on that, where like one thought the other one was, and kind of what happened?
Yeah, so in a lot of divorces, obviously some can be kind of heated. And, depending on how the divorce decree is written, if they're at that point, one person thinks that one spouse is paying the mortgage, the other thinks that the other is. And as it turns out, no mortgage payments are being made. So we've run into situations where, there's past due interest, past due mortgage payments on payoff, it gets heated, especially, Steve was talking about earlier, then you're dinging credit. And if they're both on there, then you potentially have to get a judge involved, which I know we've had a couple of situations where judges have had to get involved to award one spouse money over the other spouse. So just keeping in good communication and making sure that the mortgage payments are being made. I had one when I was in lending where there was a divorce decree where the husband was supposed to pay the mortgage. Well, he wasn't. He didn't live there anymore. And I just had to tell the spouse that, look, one of you has to make the mortgage payments until you guys get this figured out. Otherwise, you both are going to lose the home, and it's going to hurt both of you.
Yeah. No, and I think that's such good advice. So again, if you're in that situation where you're, going through a divorce, that's part of what I've been trying to help people with my, program Thrive and Decide, is just helping them to know all the facts, all the things that they need to look out for so that you can come out on the other side financially stable. Because I know the three of us all are very, passionate about making sure that people are taken care of and that they, are living comfortably and that no one is, going homeless or, not able to eat because they have to pay their mortgage, things like that. Like I know we all care about the best interest, so.
Right.
Well, and to go back to Steve's point too, I would rather, in that divorce situation, I would rather be frustrated and upset and paying a mortgage for 3-4 months rather than not being able to buy a home for 7 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can you guys think of any other, because I know we talked a lot offline, can you think of anything else that maybe you want to make sure people know, or like another, example that maybe you've gone through that you'd like to share? Because again, I just think knowledge is power, and I just, I want to make sure that people kind of know, one, they're not alone, you're not the only one that's going through this, and two, like there are ways that people can help.
Yeah, I'll just say numerous times I've had the same thing where it's like, hey, my wife lost her job, we're falling behind, what can we do? And they have equity. Like that's the thing that you have to realize is equity is power. I mean, you really, you have a ton of stuff, but the problem with equity is it's hard to tap into. You just need to find the right program. Sometimes it's just a home equity line of credit so that you can pay stuff for a while, and maybe that's just a band-aid, so you just need to do that until you find a new solution, like possibly downsizing. But I had a veteran recently who reached out who needed help, and we were able to restructure the debt that he had. Like I said, it saved him about $2,000 a month.
Wow.
Which then he can stay in his house, and that was enough to allow him to get ahead. He had those 2 payments that he didn't have to make while we refied. $2,000 a month extra in his budget, so it worked out that way. But I have had the opposite, where I can structure something like that, and they say, you know what, I don't want to do it, and then 3 to 6 months later, they call back, they're like, we want to do it, but now they've missed payments. Now their credit score tanked, they can't do it anymore. So it is important to make sure, you're realistic with what you can and can't do, and if you are proactive, take the help.
Yeah.
Take the help right away instead of now you don't qualify.
Yeah.
So.
Now, once that 2 years passes though, and does it just completely fall off their like credit record? If they did a short sale or if they did foreclosure, it's 7 years.
Yes.
So once that time is passed, does that fall off, or is that still going to kind of haunt them?
Well, it falls off the qualification. It might still be on credit in some way. Like those late payments on your previous trade line, just because it's a closed trade line, like that'll still be there. But typically after 7 years, it shouldn't affect you anymore.
Okay.
The 2-year thing for short sale, that's really like you can go into an FHA loan, which FHA for foreclosure, now I'm second guessing myself. I think it might be 4 years, second guessing myself. But so FHA is a little bit more lenient on those kind of things.
Okay.
So we just really got to dive into it and look. But yeah, after a while, your credit should repair.
When I feel like another big thing for people to know is that it's not a cookie cutter approach. Everyone is different. And so getting in touch with the right people proactively is going to be the best thing for you, because again, that knowledge is going to give you the power and the control to make the decisions that, again, you may talk to an expert, you may, talk to one of us and find out like, hey, there's really nothing we can do. Okay, cool. So like, what are our next steps? But you also may find out, wow, there's some things I could do and I could keep my house and, and not affect my credit.
Right.
So.
And it really comes down to planning too. Like if your taxes are going up and you're on a fixed income, you know what your income's going to be every single month, and you can tell right then and there, am I going to be able to afford this home? What are my options? Or if you do work a W-2 job, how much overtime you have to work. You used a really good point earlier about being house poor.
Yeah.
It's not worth a quality of life going down. You just got to be able to plan ahead, recognize it, and then talk to the right people to make sure you don't end up putting yourself in more stress, working 40 hours of overtime every week just to make the house payment work.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's why, when people do, we start this process of purchasing a home, I'm always like, what were you approved for? Cool. Now, what is the monthly payment on that? Like, you need to be asking your lender what that monthly payment is, because if you can't afford that, you know, like, cool, you were approved for $500,000. Okay, great, but that monthly payment, can you really afford that? Because you're probably going to be more likely at like the 300,000 mark, and that's okay, because then you're going to be able to afford it, and you're going to be able to like do things like eating, going out, traveling. You know, you're not just stuck in your house. You know, just unless that's really what you want. Like, if that's your goal, is to just have the biggest, best house and you never want to leave again, cool. Like, we can make that happen. But most people are not like that. So, but I think it's the same thing whenever it comes to, you know, the refinancing and all of that stuff. Is it, you know, to your point, is this going to help you enough that you can stay in your house? Or if it's not, what is the next step? Like, let's go ahead and get you out of this, get you into something new that you can afford, and so then you can go back to eating out, going to the movies, going on vacations, you know, paying off your other debt.
Yeah, and sometimes the refi is, like I said, a Band-Aid. Like, you know, we can pay off some debt and get you in a spot where you can last a while, but maybe, you know, maybe you do need to think about moving or renting for a little while. You know, it just depends on the situation. But
and that's exactly it too. I mean, I know you've seen this where you pay off a lot of debt, but if the money hasn't changed and you're racking those credit cards right back up, then in 6 months to a year, you're right back where you are. The stress wasn't eliminated. So just getting ahead of it. And on another part, if you do fall behind, you know, one of the things I would caution is there's a lot of companies out there. They're not scams, but they're investors, and I would say that with air quotes, because they're coming in trying to help you. They know you're distressed, you're not thinking correctly. We had a option contract come in about 3 months ago that was pretty terrifying if you actually read through it. You know, not only did the owner of the home no longer get to own the home, it was a rent-back situation at a higher rate. There was an option to purchase, but that can fluctuate. However, the investor basically had all the control and could kick them out at any time. So they're basically preying on you because they know that you're distressed. You're not going to be able to make clear decisions. So what I would say is, you know, contact a real estate agent, contact the title company, have the attorney or the agent look through that contract and really decide if that's your best option.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's what I always try and like tell, you know, my clients. Like, if you get something in the mail and it doesn't make sense to you, or it seems too good to be true, or kind of scammy or whatever, screenshot it to me. You know, take a picture of it, send it to me. I'm happy to look through it. I don't care if it's been 5 years since we've talked. Like, send it to me. I mean, it's probably unlikely that it's been 5 years, but because I'll continue to reach out. But if for whatever reason we haven't, and you like, I will read through that, you know. And to your point, there's so many people out there that prey on people, or there's scams, or you know, whatever. And if you sign that, like, you're screwed, and it really just stinks. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a really good point too, that we had talked about, you know, just making sure, again, that we're taking care of people and making sure that they have all the facts so that they can make the decision that makes the most sense for them in their situation. So,
absolutely,
I love it. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day. I know I've taken a lot of your time, but I really appreciate it. So, thank you.
Thank you. And hopefully whoever's watching can learn a little something and make better decisions. I hope so. So I will have all of your information in the show notes. So if you guys want to reach out to, you know, Steve or Chris, and you have any questions, you know, obviously you can reach out to me, you can reach out to them. I'll have your socials on there as well, so that they can, you know, follow you and see, you know, the good things that you guys are doing, things like that. So, so hopefully you got some great information from this. Please make sure that you leave a review, because feedback is a gift. Make sure that you're sharing this with others, because that is the best compliment you can give me and these guys, is sharing this. And then make sure you're following the show so you never miss another episode. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time on Come to Find Out.